My name is Alex. I'm 28. And yesterday, my parents sold my life's work for $50,000 to bail out my brother. This morning, they watched on the news as it was valued at $5 billion. What they didn't know was that their betrayal was the best thing that ever happened to me. If you're watching this and you've ever felt undervalued by your own family, drop a comment letting me know where you're viewing from. Before I tell you how an act of treachery turned into an unbelievable victory, hit that like button and subscribe to hear more real stories about finding your own worth when the people closest to you let you down. Before my life was turned upside down by an act of breathtaking betrayal, my existence was a quiet rhythm of code and compromise. I was a software engineer, living in a small, perpetually dim, one-bedroom apartment on the far edge of the suburbs. My life was defined by my work, but not the 9-to-5 job that paid my bills. It was defined by Echo, the personal project that consumed every spare moment. Echo was my symphony, a contextual learning AI that I was meticulously crafting from scratch. It wasn't just an algorithm. It was an extension of my own mind, a complex system designed to understand and augment human creativity. I believed it could change the world. In the quiet solitude of my room, surrounded by the glow of monitors, I felt like an architect of the future. In my family, however, my identity was far less grand. I wasn't the innovator or the architect. I was simply the reliable one. I was Alex, the responsible younger son, the one who navigated his own path through college with a patchwork of academic scholarships and grueling part-time jobs. I did this so that my parents, Mark and Helen, could pour their financial and emotional resources into a singular, all-consuming project: my older brother, Leo. Leo was a force of nature, a classic golden child sculpted from charisma and entitlement. He was the sun around which our family's little solar system revolved. While I was methodically building a stable career and a groundbreaking piece of technology, Leo was a supernova of failed ventures. He blazed through one half-baked business idea after another, each one more grandiose and less viable than the last, leaving behind a nebula of debt, broken promises, and disappointed investors. And after each spectacular collapse, my parents were there, ready to cushion his fall, often using their retirement savings, and more than once, fragments of my future. This deeply ingrained pattern of sacrifice and favoritism wasn't a recent development. It was the bedrock of our family dynamic. I remember when I was 17, a memory so sharp it still feels like a fresh wound. I had spent an entire sweltering summer bussing tables and washing dishes at a greasy spoon diner, the smell of burnt coffee and bleach clinging to my clothes long after my shifts ended. I saved every single dollar, every crumpled tip, to buy my first car, a beat-up, 20-year-old sedan with a permanent rattle and a distinct personality. I loved that car. It wasn't a status symbol. It was a monument to my own sweat and discipline. 2 weeks after I proudly got my license, Leo, whose own license was suspended after a string of speeding tickets, decided my monument would make a great toy. He lifted the keys from the hook by the door for what he later called a harmless joyride. He wrapped the car around a telephone pole less than a mile from our house. The front end was crumpled like a discarded piece of paper. When I confronted him, his lack of remorse was stunning. He just shrugged, a smirk playing on his lips. "It's just a junker, little bro. Relax. It's not like it was a real car." The deepest cut, however, came not from Leo's callousness, but from my parents' response. It was a masterclass in emotional triage, where my pain was deemed a minor scrape compared to Leo's potential discomfort. "Alex, you know Leo is going through a tough time," my mother said, her voice a low hum of anxiety directed entirely at him. "He's feeling so lost. We can't let this crush his spirit." My father, ever the pragmatist, delivered the financial verdict. "We'll use the money you saved up for the insurance deductible and the repairs," he announced, as if it were the most logical solution in the world. That way, no one official has to get involved, and Leo won't have this on his record. My own record, my own savings, my own feelings, none of it factored into the equation. I had to drain my fledgling college fund to fix the car my brother destroyed. Leo never apologized, never offered to pay a cent, and within a week, the incident was never spoken of again, erased from the family history. This precedent of my assets being a communal resource for Leo's emergencies solidified when it was time for college. I had worked tirelessly in high school, driven by a desperate need to create a future for myself that didn't depend on anyone else. My efforts paid off with a full academic scholarship to study computer science. It was my proudest achievement. My parents had a college fund they had been contributing to since I was born, and they had always promised it would be mine upon graduation, a nest egg for a down payment on a house, or seed capital for a future venture. Just 3 months into my freshman year, Leo came to them with his next miss opportunity, a premium, subscription-based delivery service for artisanal gourmet pet food. It was an idea built on buzzwords and a complete lack of market research. My father called me, his voice booming with a manufactured excitement I knew all too well. "It's a sure thing, Alex. Leo has it all figured out. We've decided to invest your college fund into the company. Consider it an investment in your own future. When Leo's company takes off, you'll get 10 times that money back." I protested. I reasoned. I begged. I explained that I was counting on that money. It didn't matter. My rational concerns were no match for Leo's dazzling charisma. The company, predictably, imploded in less than 6 months, taking my entire college fund with it. The money vanished, and with it, any pretense that my future was as important as my brother's present. No one ever said they were sorry. So, I learned to expect nothing. I insulated myself. I worked 3 different part-time jobs while carrying a full course load. I lived on instant noodles and cheap coffee, and I poured all my energy, all my hope, and all my intellect into Echo. It became my sanctuary. But in the eyes of my family, this complex, beautiful thing I was building was nothing more than a childish diversion. "When are you going to stop playing with that computer game and get a real second job to help the family?" my father would ask. The injustice was a constant, low-grade fever, a chronic condition of my life at home. I had learned to function with it, to breathe shallowly beneath its oppressive weight. I truly thought I could endure it forever, but I had no idea that their next act of casual betrayal was about to set my entire world on fire. The storm that would ultimately shatter and remake my life began, as it so often did, as a low-pressure system named Leo. His latest venture, Artisan Connect, was his most ambitious and most disastrous yet. It was a beautifully designed, utterly dysfunctional online platform intended to connect local artisans with a global market. Leo, a master of the sales pitch but a novice in execution, had burned through his seed money with astonishing speed. He'd spent lavishly on a slick marketing campaign, hosted extravagant launch parties, and made promises to his investors and craftsmen that were impossible to keep. Now, the facade was crumbling. The investors were circling like sharks, threatening lawsuits, and the artisans were posting scathing reviews online. Public humiliation and financial ruin weren't just on the horizon, they were hammering at his door. One Tuesday evening, the dreaded summons arrived via a terse text from my mother. "Emergency family meeting. 7 p.m. Don't be late." I knew exactly what that phrase meant. It was never a meeting to solve a problem collaboratively. It was a tribunal where I would be implicitly tried for not doing enough, followed by a fundraising session where my resources would be scrutinized. I walked into the living room of my parents' house, bracing for impact. The scene was a familiar tableau of manufactured crisis. Leo was slumped dramatically on the sofa, head buried in his hands as if in mourning. My mother was pacing the worn carpet, her hands twisting a dish towel into a tight knot. My father stood guard by the fireplace, his arms crossed, his face a mask of grim determination. "Leo's in serious trouble," my father began, forgoing any pleasantries. "His company is about to go under. He could lose everything." Leo lifted his head on cue, his eyes artfully red-rimmed and glistening. "I've lost it all," he choked out, his voice thick with a performance of despair I'd seen a dozen times before. "My reputation, the investors' money, they're going to destroy me. I'll be ruined." My mother's gaze locked onto mine, her eyes wide and pleading. It was a look that carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken expectations. "Alex, you have to help your brother. You're the genius with computers and numbers. There has to be something, some clever trick you can do." I took a slow, deep breath, feeling the familiar, suffocating weight of unearned responsibility settle onto my shoulders. "I'm really sorry to hear that, Leo," I said, keeping my voice even. "I can take a look at your books, your cash flow statements. Maybe there's a way to restructure the debt, negotiate with the investors, or find a technical solution to salvage the platform's assets." "No, no, it's too late for that." Leo shot back, leaping to his feet with a sudden burst of energy. His despair vanished, replaced by an urgent, demanding tone. "I don't need a consultant. I need a lifeline, a cash injection. $50,000 right now. It would hold off the angriest investors and buy me the time I need to turn things around." A heavy silence descended upon the room. The number hung in the air, obscene in its casual audacity. All three of them were staring at me, their expressions a mixture of hope and demand. "I don't have that kind of money," I stated flatly. The truth, a cold, hard stone. "Every spare dollar I have is invested in the infrastructure for Echo-dedicated servers, advanced software licenses, cloud computing costs. It's not liquid cash sitting in a bank account." My father's face, which had been etched with concern for Leo, now hardened into a mask of cold disappointment directed at me. "So your little hobby is more important than your brother's entire future. Is that it, Alex?" A spark of anger flared within me. "It's not a hobby," I countered, my voice firmer than I intended. "It is my life's work. It is my future. And as I already said, I am willing to help with my time and my expertise, which is valuable." The argument raged for another hour. It was a well-rehearsed play. My mother provided the tearful emotional appeals, painting apocalyptic visions of Leo's ruin. My father supplied the guilt trips and the thinly veiled accusations of selfishness. Finally, emotionally drained and utterly defeated, I retreated to the sanctuary of my room, to the clean, predictable logic of my code. As I was trying to lose myself in my work, my father appeared in the doorway. He walked in, adopting a tone of newfound interest in the very project he had just dismissed. "So, how does this thing actually work?" he asked, pointing a thick finger at Echo's complex user interface on my screen. His eyes scanned the lines of code as if they were a foreign language. "Is it valuable? I mean, would a company ever buy something like this?" I was so desperate for any sign of genuine interest that I pushed my frustration aside. I patiently explained the architecture, the learning algorithms, the vast potential for commercial application in creative industries. I told him that yes, one day it could be extremely valuable, but that it was still in a crucial stage of development. Selling it now would be like selling a half-built skyscraper for the price of its raw materials. He nodded thoughtfully, but as he turned to leave, I caught a strange glint in his eye. It was a look I couldn't place at the time. I know now what it was. It wasn't the look of a proud father. It was the calculating gaze of a man assessing the value of an asset he was about to liquidate. They left me alone that night with strained smiles and hollow promises that they would figure something out. My fatal mistake was believing them. I had no idea their plan was already in motion. In the days that followed, the house was cloaked in a strange and unsettling calm. The open confrontations ceased, replaced by a tense, suffocating quiet. My parents moved around me like ghosts, our interactions reduced to clipped, artificially polite exchanges about the weather or who was going to take out the trash. Leo was conspicuously absent, supposedly off meeting with potential business partners to salvage his company. I tried to immerse myself in my work, to find solace in the clean logic of my code, but a persistent, gnawing sense of unease followed me like a shadow. I felt like I was living in the eerie silence before a thunderstorm. The escalation began not with a bang, but with a series of quiet, invasive acts. It started with my office. I always kept the door locked. It was my one private space in the house, my sanctuary. One afternoon, I came home from a grocery run to find it slightly ajar. My heart did a quick, nervous stutter. Inside, at first glance, everything seemed to be in its place. But a closer look revealed subtle disturbances. A stack of technical documents on my desk had been shuffled. A notebook I kept with high-level architectural plans was not quite squared with the edge of the table as I always left it. It was the work of someone trying, and failing, to cover their tracks. When I questioned my mother, she waved a dismissive hand, not even looking up from the magazine she was reading. "Oh, I just went in there to do a little tidying, dear. Your room was getting so messy, I couldn't stand it." The lie was so transparent it was almost insulting. She hadn't tidied my room since I was 15. It was a clear message. Your boundaries mean nothing to us. A few days later, my father cornered me in the kitchen, his approach cloaked in a clumsy attempt at casual curiosity. He began asking a series of oddly specific, technical questions about Echo. "So, theoretically, how does one transfer ownership of a digital project like this?" he asked, stirring his coffee with intense focus. "Is it all stored in the cloud, as they say? Are there master passwords or some kind of special key to access the core source code?" A cold knot formed in my stomach. These were not the questions of a curious father trying to understand his son's passion. These were the questions of a burglar casing a house. "Why are you asking, Dad?" I pressed, my voice low. He flinched, startled by my directness, and quickly avoided my gaze. "Just curious, that's all. Trying to understand your world. To be supportive, you know." This new, feigned support was more unnerving than their years of indifference. Their interest felt like surveillance. I was no longer their son. I was a puzzle to be solved, a lock to be picked. The solution to Leo's problem was trapped inside my digital vault, and they were methodically searching for the combination. Then came the full-scale psychological assault from my mother. She began a campaign of emotional attrition, designed to wear me down. She would find me when I was deep in work, her face a carefully constructed mask of maternal anguish. "I'm so worried about Leo, Alex," she'd begin, her voice trembling on cue. "He's not eating. He's not sleeping. He just stares at the walls. If his company goes under, I don't know what he'll do. He feels things so much more deeply than you do. He's always been so sensitive." She would pause, letting the toxic comparison hang in the air. "I know you think you're doing the right thing, protecting your project," she'd continue, her eyes welling with tears. "But if something terrible were to happen to your brother, if he were to do something desperate, could you ever forgive yourself?" Every word was a precision strike, a poisoned dart of guilt aimed directly at my conscience. They were reframing the narrative with breathtaking skill. My prudence was being twisted into cold-hearted selfishness. Leo's chronic recklessness was being repackaged as a tragic fragility that only my sacrifice could cure. I was being cast as the villain in a story where I was the only one acting with any sense of responsibility. The breaking point of my denial came late one evening. I was coming down the stairs for a glass of water when I heard my father's voice, a low, angry whisper, coming from the living room. He was on the phone, the dim light from the street lamp outside casting long shadows across the room. "I don't care what he says," my father hissed into the receiver. I knew instantly he was talking to Leo. "He's just a kid playing with a computer. We are his parents. We know what's best for this family. Just get the damn paperwork ready." My blood ran cold. Paperwork. We know what's best. I stepped into the room, and he started, yanking the phone away from his ear and ending the call abruptly. A flash of pure, undisguised guilt crossed his face before he quickly covered it with a scowl of indignation. "Weren't you taught not to eavesdrop on private conversations? What paperwork were you talking about?" I demanded, my voice shaking with a mixture of fear and fury. "It's none of your business," he snapped, his voice rising. "This is adult business, and you've made it clear you don't want to be a helpful part of this family." It was in that moment that I knew, with absolute certainty, that I couldn't trust them. My own parents were actively plotting against me. Desperate and feeling utterly alone, I reached out to the one person I thought might understand the gravity of the situation, Dr. Eris Thorne, my old university professor and the closest thing I had to a mentor. I drove to his office in a daze, my stomach in knots. I sat across from his worn oak desk and laid out the entire sordid story. Eris listened without interruption, his wise, kind eyes studying me over his thick-rimmed glasses. When I finally fell silent, the weight of my story hanging heavy in the air, he leaned back and steepled his fingers, his expression one of profound seriousness. "Alex," he said, his voice gentle but firm as steel, "you must understand. They don't see your project. They see a piggy bank. They don't see their son. They see a means to an end. This has gone beyond family dysfunction. You have to protect your intellectual property as if it were a hostile corporate takeover. Immediately." His words were a brutal, necessary validation. He wasn't telling me I was overreacting. He was telling me I wasn't reacting strongly enough. "What should I do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "First thing tomorrow, you call an IP lawyer. You copyright your source code. You form an LLC for the project, separating it legally from you as an individual. And most importantly," he said, leaning forward, his eyes intense, "you build a safeguard into the code itself. A digital poison pill, if you will. A self-executing clause that triggers on any unauthorized transfer of ownership below a specific valuation. You need to make Echo too dangerous for them to touch." The wake-up call from an outsider, from a respected figure who saw the value in my work and the danger in my situation, galvanized me. A wave of pure, cold resolve washed over me, extinguishing the last embers of my childish hope that my family would do the right thing. They wouldn't, so I would have to. I thanked Eris and drove home, a plan forming in my mind. I would protect my work. I would protect my future. I thought I had a few days to act. I had no idea the clock had already run out. The point of no return didn't arrive with a scream or a slammed door. It arrived with the sterile, indifferent click of a mouse, delivered quietly and coldly to my inbox on a gray Thursday morning. I was at my desk, the first bitter sips of coffee doing little to cut through the oppressive anxiety that had become my constant companion. My eyes were scanning a routine system diagnostics report when a new email popped up. The subject line was simple, automated, and utterly terrifying. Notification: Project Echo ownership transferred. For a disoriented second, my brain refused to process the words. It had to be spam. A sophisticated phishing attempt. My heart began to hammer against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. I clicked it open, my hand trembling slightly. It wasn't spam. It was a formal, legally binding transaction record from the secure code hosting platform I used. In cold, black and white text, it detailed that the complete ownership rights and all associated assets for Echo AI version 1.0 had been irrevocably transferred from my personal account to a limited liability company I had never heard of, Leo's Holdings, LLC. And then, my eyes landed on the number, and the air was punched from my lungs. Sale price, $50,000. The room tilted on its axis. $50,000. The sum was both an absurdity and a profound insult. They had taken thousands of hours of my life, the sleepless nights fueled by caffeine and ambition, the countless personal and social sacrifices I had made, and they had sold it all for the price of a mid-range sedan. They had put a price tag on my soul, and it was a clearance rack bargain. I shot out of my chair, the phone clutched in my hand like a weapon, the damning email glowing on its screen. I stormed into the kitchen. My parents were there, sharing a pot of coffee, an air of unnerving, quiet relief hanging between them. They were whispering, and I caught a few words. Celebration dinner. Steak. Finally over. What is this? My voice was a choked, ragged thing I barely recognized. I thrust the phone in front of my father's face. My mother glanced at it, then quickly looked away, her sudden fascination with the salt shaker on the table a testament to her cowardice. My father, however, met my gaze head-on. His face hardened not with guilt, but with a chilling, self-righteous defiance. It was what needed to be done, Alex. It's for the family. Needed to be done? I repeated, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. You sold my project. You sold my future. How did you get my password? He didn't even have the decency to lie. Your mother saw you type it in a few times when she brought you snacks, he admitted, his tone devoid of remorse. We had to act. Your brother was out of options. I am your son! I finally roared, the dam of my carefully controlled composure shattering into a million pieces. This was my life's work. You had no right. I have every right, my father bellowed back, his voice booming with a lifetime of perceived authority. We are your parents. We raised you. We fed you. We gave you a roof over your head. Sometimes, family demands sacrifice. Sacrifice. The word was a weapon they had wielded against me my entire life. It was always my sacrifice they demanded, never Leo's. It's just a little side project, Alex. My mother chimed in, her voice a useless, placating murmur. It was a hobby. Your brother's life was on the line. That was the moment of absolute, horrifying clarity. The moment the last vestiges of my childhood illusions about family and unconditional love were incinerated. They didn't see me. They didn't see my work. They saw Leo and his bottomless pit of problems, and they were willing to sacrifice anything and anyone to fill it. They were willing to cannibalize one son to save the other. You can always make another one, my father said, delivering the final, devastating blow. The words were casual, dismissive, and they landed with the force of a physical strike. We can't make another son. There it was. The raw, ugly, unspoken truth of our family laid bare on the cold linoleum floor of our kitchen. In their twisted calculus of love, I was a renewable resource. Leo was a priceless, irreplaceable treasure. I stared at them. These two people who shared my blood but not my heart. The fire of my rage cooled, instantly extinguished, and replaced by a vast, arctic emptiness. There was nothing left to say. I turned without another word and walked back to my room, the sound of their shallow breathing behind me. I closed the door, the click of the latch sounding like a final, definitive end. But as I leaned against the wood, instead of crushing despair, A strange, cold calm washed over me. An idea was crystallizing in the wreckage of my emotions. They thought they had won. They thought they had stolen my little project. They had no idea they had just armed a $5 billion time bomb, and the countdown had already begun. Sitting in the deafening silence of my room, I opened my laptop. The transaction notice was still on the screen, a glaring, digital tombstone marking the death of my trust in my family. But beneath the layers of shock and anger, a cold, clean current of adrenaline began to surge through me. This wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. They thought they had won. They thought they had stripped me of my most valuable creation. It was time to show them what a catastrophic miscalculation they had made. My secret weapon wasn't a hidden legal document in a safe deposit box or a secret trust fund. It was alive, humming, and woven into the very DNA of Echo. Following Dr. Thorne's urgent advice, I hadn't wasted a second. I had spent 2 sleepless days and 1 frantic night after our meeting with a brilliant, shark-like IP lawyer named Sarah Chen. Together, we had done more than just file for copyrights. We had fundamentally re-engineered the legal and technical foundation of my project. Here's the critical piece of the puzzle my parents were completely oblivious to. Echo wasn't just an application. It was a foundational AI. Its learning algorithms were revolutionary. Its potential for adaptation and integration across dozens of industries was immense. Its true value wasn't a paltry $50,000. It was exponential. And buried deep within its millions of lines of code, I had planted, with Sarah's legal guidance, a Trojan horse clause. The clause was an elegant piece of defensive design, both legally and technically. It stipulated that any sale or ownership transfer of the Echo project for a value less than $5 million, a conservative minimum valuation we had established, to any non-pre-approved third party would be considered a hostile and invalid transaction. This event would automatically trigger a secondary, overriding protocol. This protocol was designed to do one thing: immediately and irrevocably transfer the complete ownership, all source code, all patents pending, and all related intellectual property to a pre-designated major tech partner. That partner, with whom I had secretly negotiated a complex and confidential contingency agreement, was Omnicorp, one of the undisputed titans of Silicon Valley. Under the terms of this secret contingency deal, Omnicorp would acquire Echo for a price determined by a proprietary potential assessment algorithm they had developed, with a guaranteed minimum payout of $1 billion. The clause was explicit about the distribution of funds. The original seller of the invalid transaction in this case, the newly formed and soon-to-be defunct Leo's Holdings LLC, would be legally entitled to receive only the funds from their initial fraudulent sale. Nothing more. The $50,000. The entire billion-dollar-plus remainder of the acquisition fee, along with a lucrative, multi-year contract for a chief advisory position on the newly formed Echo division, would be transferred directly to me, the original creator. My parents hadn't sold my project. They had, with breathtaking ignorance, pulled the trigger on a masterfully designed corporate acquisition that cut them and their golden child out of the picture completely. They hadn't stolen my future. They had gift-wrapped it and express shipped it to me. My first move was to call Sarah. Her voice was a steady, calming presence in the chaos of my emotions. I explained what had happened, my voice flat and controlled. They triggered it, Sarah. They sold it for 50 grand. There was a pregnant pause on the other end of the line, followed by a low, impressed whistle. Well, Alex? I am profoundly sorry your family forced this situation, but from a legal standpoint, they just handed you the keys to the kingdom. Has the protocol fired? I pulled up my administrative dashboard, my fingers flying across the keyboard. It has. The transfer is locked. Omnicorp has been notified via automated secure channels. The secondary transaction is already in motion. Excellent, she said, a note of satisfaction in her voice. Now, here's the most important part. We go completely silent. You say nothing to your family. Not a word. Let Omnicorp make the public announcement. Per our agreement, they are contractually obligated to do so in a press release within 24 hours to inform the market. Let them find out from a CNN broadcast. The impact will be infinitely more powerful. It was a cold, ruthless strategy, but it was perfect. It was justice. They had treated me like an insignificant child whose prized toy could be taken away at will. Now, they would learn the true nature of my toy from the global financial news, along with the rest of the world. For the remainder of that surreal day, I committed to the role of the defeated son. I locked myself in my room, ignoring my mother's hesitant knocks and calls to come out for dinner. I could hear them downstairs. I heard the pop of a champagne cork. I heard their laughter loud, relieved, and triumphant. I heard Leo on the phone, his voice booming with false confidence, telling my parents how he had already paid off his most aggressive investors and how Artisan Connect was back in the game. They were basking in the glow of their perceived victory, utterly oblivious to the fact that they were celebrating on the slopes of a volcano that was about to erupt and consume their entire world. That night, I did one other thing. I retrieved a small, high-fidelity audio recorder I owned and discreetly placed it on a bookshelf in the living room, hidden behind a row of my father's old history books. I knew with absolute certainty that when the news broke, a confrontation of epic proportions would follow. I wanted every word, every justification, every tear of regret, not of remorse, but of lost opportunity on record. This time, there would be no ambiguity, no rewriting of history. I would have irrefutable proof. I didn't sleep a wink that night. I just sat in the dark of my room, my laptop open, watching the system clock tick down the seconds toward dawn, toward the reckoning, toward the moment their world, built on a foundation of lies and favoritism, would be reduced to ash. The next morning, I was awoken not by my alarm, but by the familiar, droning voice of the morning financial news program emanating from the living room. It was my father's daily ritual, his coffee and market updates. I stayed in my room, a coiled spring of anticipation, listening. The minutes crawled by. They talked about market trends, a merger in the pharmaceutical industry, the price of oil. And then, at precisely 7:32 a.m., I heard it. The shift in the anchor's tone, the sudden injection of excitement into her voice. And in what is already being called the blockbuster tech story of the year, industry giant Omnicorp has just announced the acquisition of a previously unknown stealth AI startup called Echo. The deal, which has sent shockwaves through Silicon Valley this morning, is valued at a staggering $5 billion. The broadcast was punctuated by a sharp, violent sound from the kitchen, the unmistakable crash of a ceramic mug shattering on the tile floor. A moment of stunned silence followed. Analysts are scrambling for information, calling this one of the most significant and aggressive strategic acquisitions of the decade. Echo AI, reportedly created by a single independent developer named Alex Chen, is being hailed as a foundational technology with the potential to revolutionize industries from graphic design to cinematic production. I heard a choked, strangled gasp. It was my mother. Mark, you need to see this now. That was my cue. I took a single, deep breath, schooling my features into an expression of detached calm that I did not feel, and walked out of my room. The scene in the living room was a tableau of pure, unadulterated chaos. My mother was standing frozen in front of the massive television screen, one hand clamped over her mouth in horror, her eyes wide and unblinking. My father stood beside her, his face drained of all color, leaving it a pasty, grayish white. He looked like he had seen a ghost. Leo, who must have arrived early to gloat and collect his spoils, was sitting bolt upright on the sofa, his smartphone having slipped from his nerveless fingers to the floor. On the screen, a sharply dressed tech pundit was gleefully breaking down the details. "What's truly incredible about this story," he said, gesturing animatedly, "is the mechanism of the acquisition. It seems Omnicorp acquired this technology through an obscure contingency clause in the AI's own terms of service. It was apparently triggered by a much smaller, prior sale of just $50,000 to a private LLC. Our sources at Omnicorp have confirmed that the initial seller, this Leo's Holdings LLC, will receive no part of the $5 billion deal." "$5 billion," my mother whispered, the words barely audible. Her head swiveled slowly, her terrified eyes finally finding me standing in the doorway. "Alex," it says, "$5 billion." My father and Leo turned as one, their expressions a grotesque mixture of confusion and dawning horror. "That can't be right," my father stammered, pointing a trembling finger at the television as if it were a hostile witness. "There has to be some mistake. Leo sold it. That money, it should be ours." Leo shot to his feet, his face a blotchy red with a toxic cocktail of panic and raw greed. "Yeah, that's right. I'm the owner. I sold it. I'll sue them. We'll get that money." "No, you won't," I said. My voice cut through their hysteria, calm, cold, and final. "You won't get a single additional cent." I walked into the center of the room, feeling the gravitational pull of power shift entirely to me. "Good morning. It looks like you've all seen the news." "Alex, you explain this. Right now!" my mother shrieked, her voice cracking with a hysteria that was no longer about Leo's fragility, but about a colossal sum of money slipping through her fingers. "What is going on?" "What's going on?" I said, making deliberate eye contact with each of them in turn, "is that you sold an asset you had absolutely no comprehension of. You looked at a rocket ship and sold it for scrap metal. You thought it was a toy. It was a masterpiece, and that masterpiece, as it turns out, had its own security system." I laid it all out for them. I explained the Trojan horse clause, articulating the legal and technical specifics with cold precision. I told them about my secret negotiations with Omnicorp, the contingency agreement, the $5 million valuation floor. I explained it methodically, dispassionately, as if I were a professor lecturing a class of particularly slow students. When I finished, a profound, tomb-like silence filled the room. The avarice that had been gleaming in their eyes just moments before had been utterly extinguished, replaced by a vast, hollow terror as they finally, truly understood the magnitude of what they had done and what they had irrevocably lost. But why?" my mother finally sobbed, collapsing onto the sofa as if her bones had dissolved. Her tears were real now, tears of pure, unadulterated regret. "Why would you do that to us? Why would you hide it?" "Why?" I asked, and a harsh, bitter laugh escaped my lips. "You're seriously asking me why?" "Because I know you. Because for my entire life, you have demonstrated that you will always choose Leo over me. You would always sacrifice my future for his latest failure. That clause wasn't designed to trick you. It was designed to protect me from you. You've destroyed this family," my father roared, his shock finally giving way to a desperate, impotent rage. "All for money." "No," I countered, my voice like ice. "You destroyed it. For favoritism. For your pathological refusal to see me as an individual with my own value, instead of treating me as a perpetual safety net for Leo's endless parade of failures. $50,000. That was the price you put on my life's work. That's the value you assign to my future. And now, it's all you have left of it." I turned my gaze to Leo, who was standing frozen, his mouth hanging slightly open. "Good luck with your company, Leo. I sincerely hope $50,000 was worth it." I walked back to my room and pulled out my duffel bag, starting to pack my essentials. A few minutes later, my mother appeared in the doorway, her face a mess of tears and disbelief. "Alex, please don't go. We can fix this. I'm sure there's a way. You can't just leave us like this." I paused, holding a stack of shirts in my hand. I looked at her, and for the first time, I felt nothing but a sad, weary pity. "I'm not leaving you," I said softly, zipping the bag closed. "I'm choosing me, for the very first time." They cried when they heard the valuation, but they weren't crying for their son or for the betrayal they had committed. They were crying for the loss of a winning lottery ticket they never even knew they were holding. And that, right there, was the entire story of my life with them. I walked out the front door of that house with a single duffel bag over my shoulder and my laptop case in my hand, the sounds of my mother's weeping and my father's angry, sputtering accusations fading behind me. As the door clicked shut, it felt less like an ending and more like a release. I didn't feel the grief of losing a family. I felt the profound, exhilarating lightness of shedding a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying my entire life. My first act of freedom was to direct the taxi to the most luxurious hotel in the heart of the city. I walked into the marble lobby and booked the presidential suite for a week, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the skyline. It was my first truly extravagant expenditure, and it felt less like a splurge and more like a declaration of independence. I spent that first day fielding a nonstop barrage of calls, not from my family, whose numbers I had already blocked, but from Sarah Chen and the executive legal team at Omnicorp. We were coordinating the next steps, planning the transition, and arranging my flight to their California headquarters for the following week. It was dizzying, professional, and blessedly free of emotional drama. In the quiet moments between calls, I would stand at the window and look out at the city, my city, and feel a sense of ownership I had never felt before. My phone buzzed incessantly with blocked notifications, dozens of texts and voicemails from my parents and Leo. I deleted them without listening. I needed a clean break. I needed to breathe air that wasn't thick with obligation and the lingering stench of betrayal. After a few days of decompression, I began the process of building a new life from the ground up. I called a high-end real estate agent recommended by Omnicorp. "I'm looking for an apartment," I told her. "Something modern, with a lot of light and a great view. Price is not an object." The words felt foreign and powerful on my tongue. Within 48 hours, she found it. A stunning, minimalist penthouse apartment overlooking the harbor. A space that was the complete antithesis of my dark, cramped suburban bedroom. As I signed the lease, paying a year in advance without flinching, I felt a surge of pure, unadulterated freedom. This was the beginning of my life, written in my own code, on my own terms. While I was methodically constructing my new reality, the world my family had built on a foundation of my sacrifices was spectacularly imploding. I heard the details through a concerned cousin who called to check on me. The $50,000 had been a single sandbag against a tsunami of Leo's debt. It bought him a couple of weeks of frantic, desperate maneuvering, but the inevitable, as it always did with Leo, arrived with a crash. Artisan Connect filed for bankruptcy, and this time there was no family asset left to liquidate, no younger brother's future left to mortgage. The safety net was gone. His public downfall was swift and brutal. The investors, feeling conned and enraged by the news of the $5 billion asset he had let slip away, filed a personal lawsuit against him, alleging fraud. My parents, trapped in the feedback loop of their own making, made one final, catastrophic sacrifice. They sold the family home, the house filled with my childhood memories, both good and bad, to cover the mountain of Leo's legal fees. I learned they had moved into a small, two-bedroom rented apartment in a less desirable part of town, a bitterly ironic echo of the very life I had just escaped. They had finally sacrificed their own home for Leo, just as they had always been willing to sacrifice my future. The pattern held, immutable and destructive. The only difference was that I was no longer there to be consumed by it. I spent my first week in the new penthouse in a blissful haze of creation. I hired an interior designer, and we filled the empty spaces with furniture that was beautiful and comfortable. Pieces that I actually loved, not just things that were practical or on sale. I set up a state-of-the-art home office overlooking the water, a clean, inspiring space where I could work and think. For the first time in my 28 years, I felt truly, unequivocally at home. The day before I was scheduled to fly to California to begin my new life, I found myself driving through my old neighborhood one last time. I saw the sold sign hammered into the front lawn of my childhood home. A brief, sharp pang of sadness hit me, not for the house itself, but for the ghost of the family we could have been, for the love that should have been unconditional but never was. But then I put the car in drive and headed toward the airport, toward the Pacific Ocean, toward my future. I didn't look back. My new dawn was breaking, and the sky ahead was vast and brilliant. 5 months. In the fast-paced world of technology, it's an eternity. In the slow, arduous process of healing and rebuilding a life, it felt both like a lifetime and the blink of an eye. My new life in California was more than just a change of scenery. It was a fundamental shift in my existence. I dove into my advisory role at Omnicorp, leading a hand-picked team of some of the brightest minds in the industry. Our mission was to unleash the full, terrifying potential of Echo. The work was intoxicating, challenging, collaborative, and deeply fulfilling. I was no longer a lone coder tinkering in a dim bedroom. I was a respected leader, surrounded by peers who challenged my intellect and celebrated my vision. For the first time, I felt the profound, grounding sensation of belonging. The financial windfall from the acquisition was, of course, life-altering. But I quickly learned that money's greatest power wasn't in what it could buy, but in what it could build. I bought a beautiful modern house nestled in the Palo Alto Hills, but more importantly, I established the Thorn Chen Foundation, a tribute to the two people who had offered me guidance when I was most lost. The foundation's sole purpose is to provide scholarships, grants, and mentorship to young, brilliant developers from underprivileged backgrounds, the kids who, like me, had immense talent but were shackled by their circumstances. Watching the first class of Thorn Chen Fellows present their projects, their faces alight with passion and opportunity, gave me a sense of purpose that dwarfed any stock portfolio. This was my real legacy. I found a new kind of family in California, my chosen family. It was made up of my team at work, other tech founders, and new friends who knew me only as Alex, the man who was passionate about AI, not Alex, the family ATM. We were a tribe bound not by blood, but by shared values, mutual respect, and a collective desire to build interesting things. Meanwhile, 2,000 miles away, justice was being served. Not by my hand or through any act of revenge, but through the slow, grinding gears of consequence. After selling the house, my parents were forced to confront a reality they had spent a lifetime avoiding. Without my presence as a buffer and a resource, they were left alone in a small apartment with the full, unfiltered force of Leo's failures. Leo, after a humiliating legal battle, managed to avoid jail time but was left personally bankrupt, his reputation in the local business community completely incinerated. The charm that had once opened so many doors was useless without the currency of my parents' backing. Unable to secure funding or a respectable job, he was working at a package delivery warehouse, the physical labor a harsh daily reminder of how far he had fallen. For the first time in his life, he was facing the unvarnished reality of self-sufficiency. My parents did reach out. The first few attempts were painful, awkward, rambling calls filled with thinly veiled accusations and clumsy inquiries about whether I could help them get back on their feet. I was polite but firm, a steel wall of boundaries they had never encountered before. I told them I would not give them a single dollar. However, I made a counteroffer. I would pay, in full, for them to attend family therapy with a highly recommended specialist, both individually and as a couple. They rejected the offer out of hand, insulted. But the seed was planted. About 6 months after I had left, a tentative email from my mother appeared in my inbox. "Your father and I have started seeing a therapist," she wrote. The words looked alien on the screen. "We are learning a lot. About enabling. About favoritism. About how our own fears made us treat you and your brother so differently. We failed both of you, Alex, in our own ways. I am so sorry." It was the first real, unqualified apology I had ever received from her in my life. It didn't magically heal the decades of wounds, but it was a start. It opened a tiny, fragile door. We began to have infrequent, scheduled video calls. They were often stilted and fraught with uncomfortable silences, but they were honest. They started asking questions about my life, my work, and for the first time, they actually listened to the answers. Our relationship will never be warm and fuzzy. The trust, once shattered, can never be perfectly reassembled. But we are slowly, painstakingly building something new. Something more honest, based on the hard-earned lessons of their loss and my independence. They had to lose everything to finally see what they had possessed all along. Last week, Dr. Eris flew out to visit me. We sat on the back deck of my house, looking out at the golden California hills as the sun began to set. "I'm proud of you, Alex," he said, his voice quiet. "And I don't mean because of all this." He gestured to the house, the view. "I'm proud because you learned how to value yourself." I thought about the brutal journey that had brought me to this peaceful moment. The betrayal hadn't just been an act of cruelty. It had been an act of liberation. It forced me to quit a game that was rigged against me. Justice wasn't watching my family fail. It was watching myself succeed on my own terms. I hadn't just survived them. I had thrived because of them. When I look back on this tumultuous year, the most profound lesson I've learned has nothing to do with binary code or machine learning algorithms. It's about the simple, complex calculus of human worth. For my entire life, I had outsourced the valuation of my own identity. I allowed my family to define me. I was the reliable one, the backup plan, the safety net. My worth was a fluctuating commodity, its value determined entirely by the current crisis level of my brother. Their betrayal, as devastating as it felt in the moment, was the single most liberating gift they ever gave me. It was a forced recalibration. It shattered the flawed system I was operating within and forced me to do the one thing I had always been afraid to do: set my own price. I learned that your true worth isn't a sticker price that others can slap on you. It's the core value you recognize, claim, and fiercely protect for yourself. And sometimes, protecting that worth requires building impenetrable firewalls and setting hard boundaries, even with the people you are supposed to love unconditionally. It means having the courage to walk away from situations that devalue you, even if, for a time, it means walking alone. The real wealth I have found isn't measured in the balance of my bank account. It's measured in the quiet peace I feel at the end of the day, knowing I am living a life that is authentically mine, surrounded by people who respect and celebrate me for who I am, not for what I can provide for them. Have you ever had to choose between your own dreams and what your family demanded of you? Have you ever had to fight for the people you love to see your true value? I would love to hear your story in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to hear more real-life stories of overcoming adversity. And please, share this with someone who might need a reminder that their worth is not, and never should be, up for negotiation. Thank you for listening. And remember, you are the architect of your own legacy. Never, ever let anyone sell it cheap.